Hi, ICBC. This is awesome, right? Second day, third day for some of us. We're going to be discussing for the next hour cannabis and emerging markets, which is actually a really, really fascinating topic because at least we were discussing in the green room, there is really no such thing as a cannabis market that really is not an emerging market. But I think that we have some really interesting panelists today who are going to give us a perspective of what it means to be an emerging market, some of the issues that are going on, and how to work successfully in your emerging market as well as inter-emerging market. So I think we have, everybody's name is up here, but we have really, really wonderful people to discuss what's going on in the UK and Ireland, in Greece, in Zimbabwe and New Zealand. Plus, of course, we'd like to get your questions as we go forward because we'd like this to be an interesting conversation. So my first question to all of you, and you can, depending on, you don't have to answer this, but I think it'd be really great. What is your definition of an emerging cannabis market? Any one of you, jump in.
Okay, great. Why not? Morning, everybody. So I suppose in the sense of an emerging market, I would say it would be to a point post-legalization where there is actually implementation of a supply chain and access to patients, or patient access to certainly qualified medicine on scale. I think, Canada has it, certain states in the US has it. Nowhere really outside of those locations actually have it, so you can classify every other region as an emerging market. For the sake of this conversation, for the sake of this panel, to give it some context, I think what we are seeing in Europe, what we're seeing in Latam, what we're seeing in Asia and in Australia, is really the development in unison of new access programs for patients all around the world. And because there isn't a blueprint, or certainly the blueprint of what went on in North America isn't exactly the one to follow when it comes to these emerging markets, you're seeing new models being implemented across the globe. And that's really, really exciting to try and cover and analyze. But for companies wanting to operate and certainly scale their business, it is exceptionally complex.
Well, you're in Ireland and the UK, right? That's one kind of emerging market. Maybe, Costas, you can talk about Greece, because I'd like to talk a little bit more about an emerging market clearly in Europe. What do you see as your definition? Is it export-focused? Is it a cultivation infrastructure? Is it having a cannabis agency? What are the kinds of things that are, in your idea, is a definition of an emerging cannabis market from Greece?
Sure. Thank you, Marguerite. Well, I think that the cannabis industry as a whole is an emerging industry. So even if we talk about North America, Canada, there's still room to grow in terms of people that have access to the products, in terms of cultivation, manufacturing, and more importantly, what I see the biggest bottleneck of the industry is the legislation. So there's room to grow on every vertical. In particular, Greece, it was one of the first European countries actually that started to form some kind of regulation to allow for the industry to grow. And most of the politicians saw it from, as an economic opportunity. And unfortunately, that left patients behind quite a bit. And 2018 is when legislation started. Big ambiguities in legislation in terms of what could be produced in the country. Basically, there was a very big bottleneck that allowed only for finished products. So you could only make Sativex or an Epidiolex. And as you can understand, that was really not something marketable. So a lot of licenses started to go out. I think in the first year, there was about 100 licenses. We're about a little less than 200 right now, 3 years later. And it's really interesting because in Greece, up until a few months ago, we have both the ruling government party as well as the opposition supporting cannabis. So Greece did an amendment in legislation a few months ago and kind of tried to clarify as to what can be produced, under what conditions, and eventually, how products will be able to get registered in order to allow for exports, and primarily flower. Well, it's still not final. So it's still an emerging market in what sense? Right now, legislation allows for the cultivation of flower and its export as long as you're manufacturing a second product that's at least registered in the country.
You're bringing up a very, very interesting discussion, and I think one of the key aspects of emerging markets is maybe products are designed either for export or you're importing them. I'd like to kind of go down to Boniface because you're coming from Africa, right? Which is a very cool emerging market, not only bringing stuff to Europe, but inter-Africa. Maybe you can talk about some of the challenges and what it means to be an emerging market from Zimbabwe.
Indeed. I'm Boniface. I'm from Zimbabwe. I can't see without these, so I'm not that weirdo who's trying to hide his eyes. And then in Zimbabwe, we just exported our first crop last month. We have more than 55 licenses, and out of those 55, less than 6 are producing. The challenge that we have right now is from a regulatory standpoint. What we have is we have a cannabis industry that is still in the fledgling stages. What I mean by that is there is confusion in regulation. The regulation is not clear. So bringing in products and taking products out is still a little bit of a challenge. I'll give you an example in South Africa. There's a Canadian company that just went through the process of cultivating a lot of crop that they were not able to export. So some of the challenges that we're facing, they come from guys like yourselves who are well-intentioned, and then you come to Africa, then you want to be a cowboy. You don't want to play with me. You want to do your own thing. It makes business difficult in terms of just getting what you want. Work with the locals, and you get what you want. And secondly, in terms of how we're working, there's I think, an issue with regards to the work that it takes to get the cannabis to be exported or to be imported. I mentioned to my friends here that everyone likes to eat sausage, but no one likes to make sausage. It's a very nasty process. So you come to Africa, I'll do the nasty business for you. We will do the nasty business for you. Together, we'll get something done. I'm here to talk about Zimbabwe. I'm here to talk about the opportunities that exist in Zimbabwe. We have great factor endowments. You can come. We have land. We have sunshine. We have a lot more to offer than what you traditionally get down here. Bring your expertise to Zimbabwe, and you'll make way more money than doing your business here.
Paul, this is my next question. So with that advertisement for Zimbabwe, how would you say the emerging market in New Zealand is developing in terms of both the creation of a domestic market and, of course, exports, which are now starting to come to Europe?
Thank you, Margaret. So even though New Zealand might not really seem like an emerging market from the outside because they have really modern regulations in place, already have the Cannabis Agency that is also cooperating with the German Cannabis Agency. It is really that they came up with this medicinal cannabis scheme just in April last year. And the goal of that was to really supply the market with some domestic, high-quality product, because all that was available until then was just really prices were really high and everything needed to be imported. So what they tried is they awarded around 40 licenses, so around 30 for cultivation and 10 for distribution and manufacturing. And now with this emerging process, and still the New Zealand government realizing that maybe some of the restrictions that they put in place, because they wanted to go really, really strict, so they looked at the German market, which is obviously for most international companies the most relevant market. They took Germany as an example and added some more challenges to it, I would say. So that means they added some extra testing. So for example, to be registered in New Zealand as a medicinal cannabis product, you have to comply with, or they will test your product for 6 to 9 pesticides and have some additional microbial testing applied to it. So this is really, really hard, and they realized that some of the other bureaucracy around it, maybe they went a bit too far, so no, they're going back a bit as well on that. So it's still emerging, and this is like in other places around the world, this is why it takes a bit longer for the New Zealand companies to actually have their first harvest and comply with all these regulations.
Well, this is really interesting. Let's get to that point, right? So I think several of you here are from countries that are really thinking about exporting, right? Obviously, the UK, and Stephen is in the UK and Ireland. That's more, I don't want to diss the weather, but that's more of an import market. What would be your recommendations to people out there about minding the gaps? So if you're in an emerging market and you want to export to Germany or you want to export to another country, how would you recommend that process begins to start, especially from a company perspective, especially as regulations are also evolving, to your point, Kostas, just about everywhere?
Yeah, I think 99% of countries and locations should be import. I think we, as an industry, are so caught up in the side of cultivation, we forget about the rest of the supply chain. And countries ultimately forget about the rest of the supply chain. So great, we have product, but how do we actually get it implemented into the hands of patient, and what's the process behind reimbursement and so forth? And there is so much talk of cultivation and product. And yes, obviously it is exceptionally important, but there's 1 or 2 facilities in Europe alone that can cater for the rest of the demand that Europe will need for the next 5 years. And, nobody talks about that elephant in the room in terms of how much cultivation actually happens. We only need to look at Canada. There was a great article 2 weeks ago by Matt Lammers from MJ Biz, who talked about 80% of cannabis being produced that has been destroyed, purely down to kind of ignorance when it comes to mapping the forecasted demand and also the understanding in terms of who the customers were and what they wanted. So, the focus of import and export and the rush to cultivation, I think is overvalued and certainly overforced by the hands of the investors who want to see significant capital returns, because that is ultimately where you are seeing the large multiples traditionally come from. But I do think that there is sufficient supply in production or in production cycle to cater for demand in Europe for the next 10 years easily. So there is obviously a benefit of having domestic supply and not being reliable on anybody else. But this is just another supply chain, just another product at the end of the day. So why should it be different to anything else that exists? And there's no other industry that takes this, I suppose, domestic first approach where everything needs to be integrated in the country in order to achieve growth. So the UK is import and export, but it's export for a very specific circumstance, and it's only starting to emerge in terms of providing domestic cultivation licenses. And there is huge risk associated with cultivation, and whereas what the UK has probably benefited more from is looking at innovation around the plant, so the science around the plant, but also the supply chain. So everything from delivery services to clinics to doctor education. And they have kind of built these elements out that has benefited the patient. Now, there's obviously still issues around pricing and still issues around consistency and supply, but that is probably common in every emerging industry and every emerging market. So these are kind of growing pains that exist in the UK. I don't think it's as a result of not having domestic cultivation. I think it's just as a result of capital being exceptionally tight in any emerging industry.
Well, I think the UK, at least in my opinion, I think the UK is a little bit different than, say, Greece or New Zealand or Zimbabwe. I'd like to come back to Kostas for a second. I mean, I think one of the issues in Greece is, obviously, there's a clear focus on the export market, but there has also been, I think, going forward, a real focus on trying to also make sure that Greek patients can get cannabis themselves. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that there's quite a few more European countries that don't allow patient access. It's not only Greece. What was your question?
Well, I think from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that companies face in Greece? Obviously, they want to make money, they want to satisfy their investors, and they want to export. But a lot of the people that I'm talking to definitely also want to help patients and develop the local markets. How would you suggest that? Well, I would say, what is your opinion on how that is proceeding in Greece? What are the challenges, and how do you think that the industry itself can rise to that? I think most people want to make sure that patients everywhere get stuff, not just if you're exporting to another country.
Well, it is, cannabis has always been political. So I think that the biggest issue for the European Union, and its respective countries, country members, the political risk of applying some form of, cannabis legalization and allowing the, intra-European trade, it carries a lot of risk. And a lot of the political parties are very afraid of how that is going to interpret to the voters. However, I think that we're getting more and more evidence of, with what's happening in the United States, what happened in Canada, Mexico, that there's a lot of more pressure now that this is a real industry, and more importantly, it's an industry that affects, sick people to one extent, but at the same time, it's about a well-being of the citizens. So I think that what we're going to start to see in the very near future is as people, as the industry becomes more legitimate, and legitimate meaning, there's actually, because the first couple of year and a half, there was a lot of wishful thinking, a lot of licenses, and, it's going to be a, $500 billion and, trillion, gazillion, $1 million market. It's still yet to come to that. So another big challenge that I see is that people did not really understand how much time it takes from the time that you get your license, or even before that, till the time you're able to have product to market. So there's been companies that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, started to, to incorporate and apply for the licenses, and we're going to start to see the fruits of those, those tries now, 3 years later. So we have a specific market now that is growing at a certain pace. And yes, I will agree with Steve that more product is going to be coming into market. So now we're going to start to see a competition in, in the product. It's not about just having EU GMP flower. It's going to be, okay, patients and, the people in Germany are going to have a selection. So we're going to start to see product differentiation. We're going to start to see certain products to be preferred over others. And at the same time, as more product is coming to the market, there's going to be a price war. So those companies that are able to cultivate at lower cost are going to have a greater profit, a greater margin to reduce their prices. So we're starting to see a shift in the criteria that people are selecting their products. Now, at the same time, when it comes down to Greece, there's probably going to be most likely we're going to see at least one company rolling out product within 2022, I should say. Companies. Local partners with Israeli expertise, and everybody's paying close attention to them to see how they're going to be able to navigate the local, regulatory authorities in terms of registering their products and exporting it to Germany and other jurisdictions. So I think as far as Greece goes, within the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to come to see exactly how the system will work. Right now, there's a lot of ambiguity, and there's people that still see a lot of challenges, but that's going to clear up within the next few months.
That's okay. So I'm going to actually skip down to the end here with Paul and Boniface, because I think that certainly Greece, most people are looking at European export. But within Africa, there's like an Africa to Africa trade, and then I think also, Paul, if you can talk about maybe not just coming to Europe, but maybe looking at other markets like Israel.
Right. Within Africa, we have not developed a domestic market. I could tell you, for example, in South Africa, you can cultivate, but you cannot extract. So you cultivate, you send it out, then you import your stuff back in. How ridiculous is that? That's very, very ridiculous. Such inconsistency in regulation is what keeps investors away. But in Zimbabwe, we understand the power of political will. So cannabis is right at the president's desk. The president himself is in charge of cannabis. I'll give you something here. We've got a 5-year tax holiday for anyone who will come and farm cannabis there. 5 years, you don't pay tax. You want to bring your money back to Germany, you want to bring it back to America, you can expatriate all your profits, bring them back. I'm sure by now you can tell that I'm fighting for Zimbabwe unashamedly, because you guys are all here for your own agenda. My agenda is cannabis and Zimbabwe, and I would like you to know that we are open for business for cannabis. We want Zimbabwe to be like how Brazil is for sugarcane. We want that Silicon Valley type of recognition for cannabis in Zimbabwe. We want to raise the floor for our standard of living. We come here to Europe, you guys live so well. You have electricity, your trains run on time. Guess what? Cannabis has got the potential to unleash a good, sustainable industry for my people so that our floor is a little bit higher. We don't want to be shitting in the bush.
But Boniface, I'm sorry to interrupt the commercial here, but I mean, for example, are people in Zimbabwe more looking at an inter-African trade, or are they looking more at Europe, or?
Well, first and foremost, we're going to look to export. Everything we make in Africa, in agriculture especially, is for export purposes. You have made it such that we rely on your foreign currency, so we cannot live if we don't sell you this cannabis. We want to sell it to you first, and then after that, maybe we can educate our people on how to use this lovely plant, because we were using it for thousands of years until some propaganda came and we stopped. So
clearly, though, I mean, there is already African cannabis going to Israel. So maybe, Paul, you can talk a little bit. Are you, from the New Zealand perspective, how do you see your emerging market developing with sort of a diverse export ideal, not just coming to Europe, but also going to other markets like Israel?
Of course, those regulations that were passed last year, they aimed at the New Zealand market, just decreasing the dependency on those exports. As Stephen said, I mean, and this is the main goal that New Zealand currently had, since they were so dependent and they had those super high regulations, which of course are now helpful if you're looking to export, because New Zealand has already some of the highest regulations in the world, which will allow us to export. But of course, this came into place to decrease dependency, and given the number of companies in New Zealand, and I mean, if you know New Zealand, it's a beautiful country, but of course it has a very small market. And we're not just talking about cannabis market, we're talking in general for any product that a New Zealand company makes. A lot of New Zealand companies are looking to export. Like, they're basically a born global no matter what they do. Those really high standards allow the New Zealand companies to then export to Germany. So this is currently, I would say, the highest priority for New Zealand companies. But of course, they're also looking to Australia. And of course, Israel would also be in those top 3 markets to look at for New Zealand companies.
Well, I think what everybody is kind of getting a sense of, if they didn't have already, is, you know, going country to country with cannabis is a bit of a risky proposition to begin with. So I'm going to throw this out to all of you. What would you say are some of the best risk mitigation techniques that companies can start to think about? It could be hiring local. It could be looking at, say, reaching an EU GMT standard. What are the kinds of things that you're seeing in your own markets that are helping cultivators and producers meet the challenge of basically being a developing market and then exporting to another developing market?
I'll take a stab. I think that the days of the investment decks where companies have flags planted all around the world are kind of outnumbered, thankfully, and that's really as a result of the realization of just how difficult executing international growth and international business development can be. We have worked in probably around 40 odd countries. over the last 5 years. And really, when we work with clients, one of the key things is on local partnership, and that is, local expertise who understand not only the legal system and have legal partners, but also, can develop the commercial interests when you or they are not there to take care of it. And that could be everybody from, for instance, in Germany, it could be anybody from a distribution partner all the way through to medical and science. And it's that type of partnership that is critical for any business that wants to flourish. Trying to come in and employ a brand manager or a country manager and have them execute organically is exceptionally difficult, exceptionally difficult, because I suppose what you're missing out on is the years of experience. And in such an early stage of the industry, it is a race, it is a land grab to acquire market share, or certainly first to market in a certain sense, and kind of market ownership. And that is, from patient access, that is from owning areas of the supply chain. Because if you can own them and lock them down, it is very hard to disrupt them in this period of time. So having local partners, I think, has been exceptionally helpful for. You see some of the companies, and certainly some of the clever companies, who have made quite strong strategic acquisitions. Now, I think there is a little froth in the market, but nowhere near what you see in North America. Now, I think the last ICBC was here in Berlin in 2019, and there was probably a kind of a cap on company valuation, European company valuations, probably in the, let's say, 30 to 40 million was probably where the top European company was. Now, fast forward around a year and a half, and you're around 200, 250. That's a phenomenal growth for strong European assets, but it's pennies on the dollar when you realize just how big this market can be and the potential size of these companies in comparison to what we're seeing in North America.
I think that was a very, very, thank you for that very comprehensive response. So I'm going to actually throw this out to everybody else. Can you tell the audience or entertain them maybe with any either success or horror stories that you might have come across about companies that, sally forth and either get into trouble or have managed to overcome some of the challenges that I think everybody is talking about and referencing?
I mean, talking about success, I'm really happy that we now have 2 of those New Zealand companies I'm working with and supporting in the market. They have agreements in place with German wholesalers and importers, which was, of course, a really big step for them. So I'm excited. So I would definitely count this as a really great success story for New Zealand and for the local industry. And of course, there's way more companies that now take this as inspiration to also look for partners here in the market. Additionally, I think, in general, if you're looking at the industry, it is a success story for the country, because if you're looking at New Zealand, a lot of the land is owned by the Maori population, and so New Zealand puts a lot of resources and support in that to support the local industry that is partly run by Maoris. And the great thing is, we already heard that yesterday in Jamie's keynote, I believe, that she said we're moving away from money. I mean, yes, money is still very important, but we're looking for well-being, for sustainability, and so on. And I think really this is where New Zealand has done a really big step, because if you're looking at those Maori businesses that grow the cannabis there, they really put the money into the local community and really help the region, the rural areas grow.
Well, I think that, Paul, you're bringing up a big point that we were all discussing in the back room, which is, cannabis as a tool of economic development. Maybe Costas and Boniface, you can talk a little bit about, the emerging economic and incentive environment that is allowing the industry to grow. Let me start with Costas.
Sure. I think that most of the European countries, they're already offering European grants, incentives that are, in most cases, I know for a fact it works for Portugal, it works for Greece. I'm not familiar with any other country, but I'm sure it's the same mechanism that gets implemented. They're able to provide grants with specific percentages up to like 30, 40% of construction cost, or, greenhouse construction, depending on how far, like, you get more money the further out you are from major cities. So that is a great financial incentive. Where you're looking at putting together like a 10 million euro facility, you could get a couple million, 2-3 million, based on the location. However, that creates another potential challenge, which is, okay, if you're going to go in a remote village in Greece, that nobody really wants to go and live there, where are you going to find your workforce? So, although and I'm going to go back to a little bit to the risk mitigation question that you said, and I think that one of the most important aspects that a lot of people miss in the industry is that you need to educate yourself about the industry. You need to learn and make sure that you have clear and real expectations as to where the industry is right now, where it's going to go. Because right now, you're looking to put a facility together that's going to have product ready probably in about 2.5 to 3 years from now. So how are you setting those expectations, and, looking at those strong partners. I mean, I work for a company that we manufacture EU GMP equipment, and I have people all over the world reaching out to us and like, well, we want to get into extraction. They want to buy equipment, and talking about those horror stories. I come across at least 3 different companies that had already paid, 300,000-400,000 euros worth of equipment that didn't have a CE marking and could not cross the border and get into Europe. So, and it's funny because the people that actually ordered that equipment were based in either Canada or the United States. So it wasn't people that are outside of the industry. They knew what's being used, but they seem to have missed this little piece of information. EU GMP has been another big challenge for many. It used to be a challenge up until a couple of years ago, until we came to see how companies came to overcome that. And I think that a common practice in Europe has been to bring people in from the pharma industry, work closely with them. And there has been a lot of people that were, promising EU GMP, yeah, we know it, we can do it, et cetera, but the only people that were actually to pull it off were people that brought the people in, worked with them, and actually kept that, that knowledge in-house, developed it, and they kept it kind of, secret. So to me, in terms of mitigating that risk, is work with people that have proven results.
As well as passion, right? I mean, Boniface was talking about, this is one of the greatest things about working in an emerging market. There's youth, there's activism, there's passion. What would you say that the role of that and the importance of that is in developing markets like Zimbabwe, for example?
I think it's very important. Where we are today is probably where the rest of the world was 5 years ago. We have a lot of optimism. When I came to Berlin, I thought I was going to be the next CBD smokable flower king. But after one day, I grew from this big and I feel this small right now. But it's good because everyone here that I've had a chance to interact with has taken the time to teach me what's going on in the industry to allow my expectations to be more realistic. I not only represent myself, I represent a nation. And the hopes of a nation lie with cannabis. The vice president came on TV the other day, said, we have $1.5 billion of cannabis that we're going to sell this year. We haven't even sold $2 million. You understand? So that optimism, I'm sure everyone here has had it before with cannabis. It's a new industry. It just needs to be checked. We need to be practical about what to expect and when to expect it and how to expect it. But to speak a little bit further on the opportunities that exist, I think before we address the opportunities, we need to look at education and regulation. People in my country need to be educated on this. It's not the same as Europe and North America. There's a huge stigma. We need to educate our doctors, our pharmacists. We need to create a local market.
Sounds like Germany.
Yeah, we need to make sure that before we even start talking about the bigger things, the basic foundation to allow there to be a cannabis national master plan, so to say. We're trying to make a national master plan where we're putting cannabis in our curriculum to get kids learning about this plant, because we understand the value that this plant has, and we want to unleash its potential in Zimbabwe.
So I'm actually going to come back to Paul here for a question. How important is it to network ahead of time and know that not only you're growing a crop in your own country, but figuring out where you have to go, right, and where you want to target. Why is it so important to find international partners in that process?
I think where you're touching on there is kind of like going back to the mitigation risk, because I think it's really crucial to have this partner who understands the local market, and this is why networking is more than important than ever, even though if you're looking at the New Zealand companies, they all they haven't exported really like a big quantity yet. We're still in an early stage, and all they have shipped is samples so far. But it's really good for also the economic stability of those companies to already have supply agreements in place, which they have domestically, but also internationally. And this is why networking is very, very important.
Steve, I'm actually going to come back to you for a second, because the UK actually is a very, very interesting case. I think it was a couple of years ago still that the UK was the biggest export country for cannabis in the world, not Canada or anything else. What does that kind of dynamic create domestically? What is the tension there?
I suppose it's quite elite and controlled. The UK has been producing cannabis near about 20 years. And what you have had is this cut off from actual patients while it's gone through, I suppose, a pharma route. So there's been, I suppose, within the cannabis industry, and certainly within the patient community, there's been a lot of friction between the types of groups who have gone down the pharma route, and it's understandable going down the pharma route. It does take significant time, investment, and you do want to protect that investment as much as you can. But there's a contrast insofar as, well, if you look at the basics of it in the early stage of cultivation, there is a product there ready for patients to use and consume, and there is, I suppose, friction that the decision hasn't been made to allow that access early days. Now that has been rectified, and patients are getting access under a very still strict manner and protocol. But you definitely have tension insofar as why is this elite group allowed access and it is cut off, and why is the government not engaging on this dialogue? And a lot of that is obviously down to cannabis hasn't been the most politically friendly conversation of the last 20 years. Now, thankfully, I think every single country is adapting their tone and openness and transparency around discussing cannabis now, that the broader education that this isn't something that kills and this isn't reefer madness. So I think we've seen sweeping changes across the globe, that cannabis is no longer the political hot potato that it used to be, and a politician can come to a cannabis conference free from the stigma, where most of us wear sharp suits, and we speak in a very professional manner, and that's relatively new. This B2B side, where we talk of implementation of a proper commercial and responsible industry. And I think it's the industry's it's been hampered, if you will, by a lack of collective individuals who are informed on the topic. I think when we started Prohibition Partners a couple of years ago, I wanted to actually invest in the space, invest in European opportunities, but there was very little information out there as to what was happening. And I think events like these are absolutely critical for us to come and share ideas. Now, we may disagree, or we may think that there is certain better ways to do it, but that is all part of the process, and certainly something that should be welcomed.
Okay, so I've got another question, and I'd love this to be a round robin. What is your favorite developing market that's not yours, and why? Start with Costas.
Well, I have to laugh at Germany, of course, because it's by far and to be more specific on the patient access only. It is really surprising how Germany, a country that always focuses on exports, has only granted 3 licenses. I have a feeling that this might change pretty soon, just based on previous track record. But we'll get to see that. However, Malta has been doing a great job. Both government-led and multi-enterprise has been doing a great job promoting the opportunities in the country. And I think that there's been, although a small country, but they have created a really interesting scheme of how they can work as a hub. Although not a European Union country, but within the European continent, I think that North Macedonia has a lot of potential.
Why do you think that North Macedonia has so much potential?
Well, there's, if I were to compare it, I mean, there's pretty similar climate, with Greece and Portugal. So, and when we speak about climate, it's not only, I mean, when you're, cultivating in an EU GMP or GCP environment, I think that the climate does play a certain role, but not that big it doesn't really make that big of a difference. However, it is low electricity, low labor costs. If you're able to overcome UGP, and I think that they have a government that's really supportive of the industry. From what I spoke with a few people over the last few days, we should be expecting some changes in that part of the world as well. I mean, Portugal has been, I think, the leading country in terms of cultivation, and 2022 we're really going to see a lot of cultivation, a lot of flower coming out of Portugal. But yeah, I think that, I mean, Denmark, of course, is a more established market in the sense that you know exactly what's going on, a lot of transparency. And we've been, as Vitalis, we've already deployed equipment there. And there's been companies that are really producing, pharmaceutical grade extracts, let's say. So I really like countries that there is stability, but at the same time, there's countries with great potential. The risk might seem to be there at the moment, but I think that if you're working with people that are, local people that have been in the industry, you can kind of safeguard your investment. But yeah, those are the countries that.
Beyond here, what about down towards non-European countries within Africa or Thailand or further afield, China?
I wanted to go with Germany as my favorite emerging market besides New Zealand, but since Costas claimed that, I will go with Israel because I think there's also definitely still a lot of potential for companies exporting there because, as I understand, there's a domestic production, but of course there's still some room for some high quality products there. And of course there is this taste in Israel this preference for flour rather than just processed products. So I think this would definitely be very interesting. But you just mentioned Thailand. I mean, I don't know the details, but I know that some of the New Zealand companies are also kind of looking into Thailand and the current developments there.
I've actually got a question for Boniface. I mean, for example, Morocco has got changing, legalization laws, et cetera, and cultivation. From your perspective, just within Africa, where would you say are like the hot countries besides South Africa and?
Besides South Africa and Zimbabwe, I was actually surprised that the lady from New Frontier Data didn't mention Lesotho. Lesotho is producing and exporting more than Zimbabwe and South Africa put together. Do you know what we call Lesotho back home? We call it the Kingdom of Mischief. Yeah, they just legalized psilocybin. They're legalizing anything and everything in Lesotho. So I'm excited about Lesotho. Check it out too.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this out. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists here? Would you like to ask about any regions? No? We've got more? None? Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, go.
Is it all going to be just commodities? Is that the future? Right? Because I feel like cannabis in this global marketplace is moving really more toward a cigarette style of production as opposed to, say, a wine or a beer style. Right? And it seems like everybody's looking for that, for like giant mega farms and huge amounts of exporting. But where's the craft? Is there space for that in any of these countries, in any of these spaces?
Yeah, there's definitely room for that in New Zealand because a lot of the companies there are actually really, really small. So with all these cultivators and producers of then products from the cannabis, it's really, we're not talking high volume. It's going to be very specialized, and a lot of the companies in New Zealand, they actually the people behind it, they all have a very strong pharmaceutical background. So they're actually looking to not just export flour, but moving into value-add products. So we're talking about extracts and other things, and because this also, let's say, kind of from my perspective, saves your business in the medical space if we're talking about legalization in other countries, because then you have this extract, this liquid, and because you know that a lot of the patients, or some of the patients, they would not necessarily like to smoke or vaporize it. So this is why actually New Zealand companies definitely focus on the value-add products in the long run, and not just exporting flowers in mass, but just like small quantities right now, but high quality.
Steve, I was hoping you might talk a little bit about the CBD craft industry in the UK a little bit, or is there one?
Yeah, craft is an odd term when you put to cannabis, because ultimately what it just means is consistency, and what we continue to lack in this industry is consistency. So the small batch producers who have been provided, who have been able to produce consistency are now termed craft, and there is a nice premium and sound about that. But I think in the stage of the industry, the level of craft is still a little bit far out. You have consumers who are only just starting to understand what they want and what they like, and the volume of and I suppose frequency of products in the market is still quite minimal, especially in Europe in terms of what choice you have and product availability. CBD craft markets. Look, rightly or wrongly, I'm quite skeptical of the CBD market. I think you have a large number of players who are promoting these CBD craft brands. That if you look at the production chain, they all come from the exact same contract manufacturer, and you have this right across Europe, and these are fooling the consumers, and it is not building any sort of true education and true brand credibility with either the product ICBD or the brand itself. And that obviously comes from early stage industry and misconception on both sides of the field. But you will, of course, have consumers who want differentiation, who want personalization and different experiences. You are seeing brand masters from pharma, from food and drink, from retail move into the cannabis sector, and there are spicy looking CBD brands and products out there, all from cosmetics to beauty to health and wellness and food and drink, starting to emerge now. Whether there is a big enough CBD market in the UK under the existing regulations to maintain that is still up for debate. But they're all hoping. They're seeing what has happened in North American market, where there is a THC opportunity, and that transition to THC and consumer demand for those type of product variations is obviously off the chart. So it's an exciting testing stage, but it comes with a huge amount of risk.
Kostas, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to, Will, that was a great question, and I must say that for the longest time that I always thought of, we're an extraction, equipment manufacturing company, so I'm very less familiar with cultivation. However, it's something that I really enjoy talking about and listening about, and I want to thank Tyler yesterday. We had a great discussion from Valeos, and the craft industry, he made a really nice comment that the size of the craft industry, is between 3 to 10 metric tons production of per year. I think that this is what we're seeing in Europe. So I thought it was going to be much less, but I think that this is substantial. It fits perfectly the European cultivation model of the facilities that we're seeing being built now, and for the longest time, I thought that, yes, of course, cannabis, similar to tomatoes or whatever, there's going to be commoditization, and I don't think that is true. I think that the cannabis consumer, and let's call a spade a spade. To me, it is not really defined where does adult use and where does medical use in terms of specifically for flower, where how many people are purchasing cannabis in Germany for medical use and how many for adult use now. I know that there is a lot of overlap, but we're starting to see over the last year at least that even the demand in Germany is increasing primarily for people that are paying for cannabis privately. So I think that over the next year and a half, we're going to start to see a significant increase in the quantity that's been in the market in Germany for people that are, using both, for both usages. So I always assimilate the cannabis consumer as like, the coffee consumer or the wine consumer. And yes, you can go to Starbucks and get an espresso, but I really like, an espresso from a little, Italian coffee shop and, or somebody that's, a Colombian coffee shop. So it doesn't mean that I won't buy coffee from Starbucks. But if I have access to that other product, I would much rather enjoy that coffee. So I think that this is...
It's harder a lot because Starbucks can afford to have all the nice locations. And so, the little mom and pop, they can't pay the rent on the gentrified neighborhood anymore. And now where do you go to get your little fancy
but here
coffee?
The cannabis has been distributed through pharmacies. So, the same pharmacy could have the same products. And, this is where we're going to see the product differentiation come into play really strongly. So when Tyler is cultivating, this product that he's been cultivating in the United States for the last 10 years, and, it's right next to, a large Canadian company that, has I'm not going to even get into the potencies, but there is differences in the cannabis flower. So if I had to choose, I would much rather go for a product that has come from the craft industry versus the big names, let's say.
Well, you actually raised an interesting question here because we're all talking about international exports, but no one has really talked about developing countries exporting into the United States. Maybe I would start with Boniface. Is that something that is on the drawing board in Zimbabwe or throughout Africa, or is it just too difficult?
It's difficult because hemp is really cheap in the States. I mean, in California, I got buddies who stopped growing hemp. I'm convincing them to move to Zimbabwe. So that's difficult. But going back to the previous question about the products, what I see the future of cannabis and cannabis products, I think of if you go to a restaurant and you look at a table, there's salt and pepper, there's sugar. Well, would like to have cannabis products right there, just like salt and pepper and sugar.
Are there any questions? Because we're sort of getting to the end of the panel. No questions out there?
Very informative.
Yes, we do.
One more.
You got to work now.
Hi, Nim from Israel. Everyone's speaking about cannabis as a commodity. And in Israel, we're importing around, just our company is importing 1.2 tons per year of medical cannabis. And it's a connoisseur product. The market is looking for more quality than quantity. I mean, they want quality and quantity. Now, everyone here is speaking about cannabis as a commodity, sugar, tomatoes. It's not. I mean, hemp is a commodity. CBD is a commodity. Cannabis, in my eyes, of course, and in the Israeli market, they're looking for premium product. And I haven't heard anything about this, the quality and of these products and importing and exporting.
Well, I think you're asking about the EU GMP issue or producing for GMP for export. I think everyone... Go ahead.
Once you go to the regulations, EU GMP or control union, you lose a lot of the quality because of the regulations. Yeah, that's what we've been seeing, because everyone's growing their capacity. If you have EU GMP, it costs you a lot of money, so you have to have a lot of quantity to, let's say, to pay for that. I can't see how you can have an EU GMP or for import and have also the quality of T20 and terpene profiles of 3.5% with these huge facilities.
Well, I think that what you're talking about actually is the dichotomy between having a regulated certified market, which is GMP standard, versus the other stuff. And I think certainly there was a little bit of disagreement up here that you can't have that in a GMP environment. Would anybody like to tackle that one?
No, I'm not a cultivation expert, but I strongly suggest that you speak with some of the. And if you don't know anybody, I can introduce you to a couple to dive deeper in that. But from my understanding, you're able to cultivate quality under EU GMP. The drying process is where you might be losing some because cultivation is GACP. So it shouldn't really affect the quality of the product. You're right about the incentive of certain cultivators to cultivate high THC potent plants because they can get more money for it. Because actually, you're getting paid based on the THC potency and CBD potency versus the rest of the the flavonoids and the terpenoids. So there is an incentive to get a higher price for other products, but this is a decision that the cultivator should take when it comes down to, okay, do I go for a product that's 18% THC, get a little bit less money for it, but maybe get larger market share in the market. So I'm not quite clear if I answered you.
I think we're out of time. Do we have time for one more question?
No,
or
we do not.
Okay. Well, thank you so
Sorry.
much. Can we have a round of applause for our distinguished panelists?